All right, welcome to week one. I want to take a moment to go over the rules for forum assignments and to provide you with some ideas to organize your participation in this assignment. First, you can't see anyone's post until you've made an initial post, which should be at least 75 words. You need to make your initial summary post by midnight of Tuesday, which this week is June the 4th. That post should demonstrate to me that you have read the assigned chapters. You can demonstrate your understanding of the material in a couple of ways. One, you can provide me with a brief summary of one or both of the chapters. Or two, you can write about some aspect of the chapter that you think is most important, most interesting, or most difficult to understand. Okay? All of your subsequent posts need to be a minimum of 45 words, and they should have some meaningful content that bears on the assigned reading. I am not interested in a bunch of posts complimenting one another on your remarkable insights. That's not cool, okay? Once you've made your initial summary post, you need to monitor the forum over the rest of the week, and you need to make interactive posts with the rest of the class. Your safest best bet to earn the maximum credit for the forum is to make an informative initial summary post by Tuesday, and then try to make at least one interactive post a day until Sunday when the forum closes and the next week's forum opens. The directions specifically states I don't want any fade outs, which basically that means, oh, I'm going to get it all in on Tuesday and then I'm not going to participate at all in the rest of the forum. I don't want that. I don't want parachuting, which is where you show up on Sunday at 5 o'clock in the evening and pepper a bunch of posts in there. And I definitely don't want any flaming. I don't want you guys getting insulting or ad hominem or antagonistic towards one another. You should keep your interactions respectful, okay, but not fawning, okay? There's a balance here. For this week, there are a number of possible topics to discuss. To me, a really interesting topic dealing with Chapter 1 is demographic change. How is this generation of 18-year-olds different from 18-year-olds from 20 years ago? What is it like coming of age in an era of social media and fake news? How are millennials entering the electorate going to change our political culture down the line? Another question I touched on in this week's overview is the erosion of trust in government among Americans. What would you say are the biggest reasons for Americans' loss in trust? And a general trend towards cynical opinions of politics. What would you suggest be done to reestablish a sense of connection between citizens and our governing institutions? As for Chapter 2, obviously there's a lot to cover. I've always found the Constitutional Convention to be a really interesting subject, and one of my favorite books is Catherine Drinker Bowen's Miracle at Philadelphia, which was actually published in 1966, but I think it's still an interesting book. Think about the compromises that the convention delegates were compelled to make in order to create a workable government. Some of those compromises actually set the stage for later conflicts, particularly the 3/5 Compromise, which essentially codified slavery as a legal institution for the first 74 years of the Union and gave the South greater voting strength than they actually deserved. It's important to recognize that the Constitution created a much more powerful government than had previously existed, but that the power of the federal government was also sharply delineated, and the system of checks and balances was designed to compel the federal government to only act in instances where near consensus had been formed. That really is the genius of our constitutional system that the founding generation created. They created a system for balancing interests against interests. The result is a kind of balancing act. Increasingly, you're seeing in our politics a lot of impatience on both sides of the aisle. And there is a willingness on the part of some to impose their will on the others. To me, we're seeing a politics that's really probing the boundaries of our constitutional system. And there's real question as to whether the constitutional balance can be maintained or whether certain institutions are just going to be, overturned. And their ability to counterbalance the others fatally harmed. The ratification process was a lot more difficult than most Americans really imagined. There was a very real possibility that enough states would have rejected ratification and that without some real effort on the part of the Federalists, the people who advocated ratification, which in some instances the efforts were pretty unscrupulous, ratification might have failed otherwise. Those differences, those efforts by the Federalists ultimately helped form the nucleus of American political thought in the form of the Federalist Papers, which began as newspaper columns calculated to attract popular support for ratification, but which have endured as some of the clearest statements of the governing principles of our founding generations. The process for amending the Constitution is also a really important topic. The framers correctly, I believe, recognized that the document would require occasional updating and changes, but again, they wanted to put very stringent requirements for changing the basics of the rules. As a result, beyond the Bill of Rights, which are the first 10 amendments, there have only been 17 amendments over 228 years, the last of which was declared ratified in 1992. So, needless to say, there's a lot to cover this week. Generally, my experience suggests that you will get out of the forums what you put into them. So let me close with a question. If you could propose one major change to our government, what amendment would you propose? Let's have a great week.